You knew the red trucks. Carolina Freight, one of the 10 biggest carriers in America, built from a single truck and 500 borrowed dollars. Then the man who built it died, and inside 3 years it was gone. It started in Cherryville, North Carolina, in 1931. The Depression had its boot on the whole country, and a young man named Grier Beam had just come home with a college degree in animal husbandry and nowhere to use it. He'd found work down in Florida after school in the poultry business, but the Depression killed that too, and he came back to Cherryville with nothing. There were no jobs there. There were barely any jobs anywhere. So he borrowed the money from his father, a farmer scraping through the same hard years, bought a used 1.5-ton Chevrolet, and went looking for anything that needed hauling. He hauled coal for the county schools. He drove down to Florida, loaded the truck with fresh fruit, and sold it off the back on street corners back home. Sweet potatoes down, tomatoes up. Whatever paid. Before long, his headquarters was a corner of his brother's Shell station, and his drivers were local men who couldn't find work anywhere else. They were glad to sleep in a truck for a week and pack their own sardine sandwiches if it meant $12 at the end of the run. That's the part everybody tells. Here's the part they don't. By the middle of the 30s, Cherryville had 3 little trucking outfits fighting over the same scraps, and what separated Beam from 1,000 other men with a truck wasn't grit. It was paperwork. In 1935, the federal government passed the Motor Carrier Act, and almost overnight the thing that mattered wasn't whether you owned a truck. It was whether you had legal authority from the Interstate Commerce Commission to run freight across state lines. Most small haulers never bothered to file for it. One local outfit, Mauney Transfer, had, so Beam and his partners bought it. Not for its trucks, for its permit. That single piece of paper gave Carolina Freight the right to operate where most of its competition legally couldn't. It is the quiet reason a broke company from a gas station outlived hundreds of others that worked just as hard. The grip of the Depression didn't let go easy. Within 2 years, every one of Beam's partners had given up and sold their shares back to him. So he did the only thing he could. He turned it into a family business. His wife, his brother, his sister-in-law. They bought the shares nobody else wanted, and the 4 of them became the entire board of directors. They borrowed $1,000 from family, built a real office and a maintenance shop, and kept the trucks rolling. Then they made a bet most of the industry hadn't made yet. In the early 1940s, while most of American trucking was still running on gasoline, Carolina Freight became one of the first carriers on the East Coast to put the new Cummins diesel engine on the road. If you have spent your life around diesels, you know exactly what that means. This little Carolina company wasn't following the industry. On the engine that would come to define heavy trucking for the next 80 years, Cherryville was out in front of it. From there it climbed. More terminals, more routes, more of that deep red steel moving on the highways. The company went public in 1963. By 1970, it was one of the 20 largest freight carriers in the country, pulling more than $60 million a year, and over the years that followed it, rose into the top 10 carriers in all of America. And they weren't only running the Southeast anymore. What began as one truck hauling produce to Florida had spread terminal to terminal across the whole country, coast to coast. In its final years, the company ran more than 13,000 trailers and better than 10,000 people on the payroll. If you drove the Southeast in those decades, you saw them. You couldn't miss them. And it stayed the kind of place where a man could start at the very bottom and end up running the whole thing. John Fraley, everybody called him Buck, got his start selling the oranges that Grier Beam hauled up from Florida. He finished as chairman of the board. What kept Carolina Freight alive through the hard decades wasn't flash. It was discipline. When the country imposed the national 55-mile-an-hour speed limit in 1974, most carriers grumbled and went along with it. Carolina Freight went further. It reached into every tractor in the fleet and cut the engine power down to match. deliberately making its own trucks slower because slower burned less fuel, and less fuel was money in the bank. That same discipline is what carried it through the Motor Carrier Act of 1980, when Washington deregulated trucking and turned a protected business into a knife fight. Rates collapsed. Famous names that had run those highways for 50 years started dying off one after another. Deregulation was supposed to reward the efficient, and efficiency was the one thing Cherryville had never been short on. Carolina Freight kept its head down and kept posting record numbers straight through the recessions that buried its competitors. And then it lost the one thing it could not replace. Grier Beam died in the spring of 1992, 86 years old. He had taken a used truck and a few hundred borrowed dollars and built a company that moved millions of tons of freight a year and put food on 10,000 tables. For 6 decades, it had been run by freight men, people who had loaded the docks, driven the routes, slept in the cabs. Beam understood the trucks. Fraley had sold the oranges. The men who came after understood spreadsheets. Within 2 years of the founder's death, the new management made a decision that told you everything you needed to know. They moved the company's operations out of Cherryville, out of the town that built it, the town whose name was practically stitched into its own. For a place that size, Carolina Freight wasn't just the biggest employer, it was the identity. And the men running it now, from somewhere else, had decided the town was a line item. The growth money went into the wrong places. The margins bled out. A national Teamster strike shut down the Union freight lines that spring, and Carolina Freight, already bleeding, had nothing left to absorb the blow. In 1995, the parent company, by then renamed Worldway, was sold to Arkansas Best for about $72 million. Carolina Freight was folded into Arkansas Best's freight line and shut down. The red trucks came off the road. The name was retired. 60 years to build, 3 years to bury. But a name like that does not die clean. A couple of years after the company vanished, a former Carolina Freight man watched that name sitting there unused, and he decided to bring it home. He started a brand new company, put the old name on it, and grabbed the Carolina Freight address on the internet before anyone else could, selling the whole thing as bringing Carolina Freight back to Cherryville. Arkansas Best took him to federal court, and Arkansas Best won. A judge ordered him to stop using the name and hand over the web address. Even as a ghost, Carolina Freight was worth fighting over. And here is the part almost nobody knows. A piece of Carolina Freight is still running today. Back in 1953, the company had started its own in-house breakdown desk. A room full of people whose entire job was getting a broken-down Carolina Freight truck back on the road. When everything else was sold and shut down, that one department survived. It got a new name, and it's been bought and sold more than once since, passed from one owner to the next. But it never left. Right now, in Cherryville, North Carolina, in the same town where Grier Beam bought that first truck, that operation is still answering the phone when a rig goes down somewhere out on the interstate. The empire is gone. The part that kept the wheels turning never left home. The original Shell station is still standing too. Beam's first office is preserved right inside it, and it's the doorway you walk through to reach the museum that grew up around it. And every year, the old Carolina Freight people come back. The drivers, the dock workers, the dispatchers. Some of them gave the company 30 and 40 years. Some of them are the last ones left who remember what that red meant on a loading dock at 4 in the morning. They walk the rows of restored red trucks, and they find the ones they used to run. Because the trucks are gone from the highways, but they were never gone from the men who drove them.